I knew something was off the second I saw the white envelope duct taped to my front gate. Not slipped in the mailbox, not left on the porch, taped like a threat, big red letters on the front. Urgent HOA notice. I tore it down and opened it right there on the gravel drive of my ranch. The sun wasn't even fully up yet, and I still had mud on my boots from feeding the horses. Inside was a 2-page letter from the Wildridge Homeowners Association, signed by none other than Wendy Dorsey, the self-appointed queen of the HOA board and full-time pain in my neck. The letter read like a declaration of war. According to the new community safety bylaw passed in a special session, all firearm possession within the Wildridge HOA boundaries was now prohibited. Not just open carry, not just visible storage, all possession. And then the kicker. Due to violations of this bylaw, the HOA has taken temporary possession of the firearms located on your property, pursuant to Section 8.3 of the revised guidelines. I stood there, stunned. They actually took my guns. Now, to be clear, I live on a 30-acre ranch that's been in my family for 3 generations. The HOA line was drawn years ago when some developer decided to slap cookie-cutter homes down on the south end of the valley. I never agreed to join, never signed a thing. But 6 months ago, some paperwork glitch bundled my property into their jurisdiction. I've been fighting it ever since. And now they think they can ban the Second Amendment. I stormed into the house and checked my safe, empty. The lever-action Winchester my grandfather gave me, gone. My 2 hunting rifles gone, the shotgun I kept for coyotes, gone. I drove straight to the HOA office, a converted model home at the end of Sycamore Ridge Lane. I didn't bother knocking. I walked straight into the boardroom, and there she was, Wendy Dorsey, with her signature lime green blazer and a face that always looked like she just smelled sour milk. "Luther Hart," she said, not even looking up from her clipboard. "We were expecting you." "Where are my guns, Wendy?" "They're in safe storage," she replied, flipping a page like it was no big deal. "You violated the new bylaw." "You don't get to violate the Constitution," I snapped. She tilted her head like I'd just said something adorable. "The HOA is a private governance entity, Luther. The Constitution doesn't override community safety decisions made by a democratically elected board. That's not how any of this works. You should have reviewed the new bylaw packet last week. We posted it online. You had every opportunity to contest it. I don't use your online portal. I didn't vote. I never agreed to this HOA nonsense in the first place. Well, the county registrar shows your parcel is now under Wildridge jurisdiction. That makes you a member. And as a member, you're bound by the bylaws." I could feel my fists clenching. "Breaking into my home to take legally owned firearms isn't a bylaw violation. That's a felony." She actually rolled her eyes. "Don't be dramatic." "We were accompanied by a licensed security contractor." "That's not law enforcement, Wendy. Luther, we all want what's best for the community. Guns are dangerous. You live too close to the new development. Children play near your fence line. We can't have firearms that close to a family area." "It's a ranch," I said, "not a daycare." Her voice dropped into that passive-aggressive tone she used when cornered. "If you want your property rights back, file a formal appeal. Otherwise, the board will determine when and if your weapons are returned." I walked out before I said something I'd regret. But I wasn't done. I had cameras, I had proof they broke in, and I had a lawyer friend who owed me a favor. Wendy just declared war. She had no idea who she was messing with. The county sheriff's office was quiet when I walked in. It was early afternoon, and the only sound was the slow ticking of a wall clock behind the front desk. Deputy Alan Reyes looked up from his computer and squinted when he saw me. "Luther, you look like you've been chewing nails." I put the envelope on the counter. "That's because someone just robbed my house and left a receipt." He scanned the letter, his brow furrowing with every line. When he got to the part about the so-called temporary possession of my firearms, he looked up and said, "They actually entered your home. Safe's empty." No signs of forced entry, which means someone had a key or picked the lock. I've got exterior footage. He stood, motioning for me to follow. Let's take a look. We moved into the back office where I pulled up the feed on my phone and airdropped it to his desktop. The footage showed two men in gray polos with Wildridge Security Services logos walking up to my porch. One of them used a key from a ring to unlock the front door. They were inside for 11 minutes, then walked out with a black duffel and a long case. Alan leaned back. This isn't a civil matter anymore. That's burglary with intent. Doesn't matter if it's a private security firm, they don't have probable cause or legal authority to enter your home and seize anything. Especially not firearms. Need anything else to move forward? I asked. I'll need you to fill out a formal statement. And we'll pull the security company's license. If they're operating under HOA instruction, that drags the board into criminal conspiracy territory. I filled out the paperwork right there. Alan took copies of the footage and promised to loop in the county prosecutor. As I walked out, I felt something shift in the air, like momentum starting to turn. Back at the ranch, I called up someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Ellie Travers. She and I went to high school together. She'd left town, made a name for herself in constitutional law, and moved back 2 years ago after a messy divorce. Now she ran a small practice just outside of town, mostly dealing with land disputes and civil liberties. When she answered, I didn't waste time. Ellie, I've got a legal puzzle for you, and it might be the nastiest HOA stunt you've ever heard. She met me at my place that evening, files already in hand. When she stepped out of her truck, her first words were, "The board doesn't have a leg to stand on." I checked the parcel annexation. It's in dispute. They shouldn't be enforcing anything until that's resolved. I led her inside and showed her the footage, the letter, and my own documentation, every certified mail receipt disputing the annexation, every response I'd ever sent to the board. She studied it all in silence. "They've overreached badly," she said finally. "And if your property wasn't legally annexed, then their entire enforcement action is illegal. Even if it was, they still can't violate state laws or federal constitutional protections. I want them held accountable, not just a slap on the wrist. I want full exposure." Ellie smiled for the first time that evening, sharp and calculating. "Then we go public. Press, injunction, and a civil suit for unlawful entry and theft. I'll file a motion first thing tomorrow." That night, I set up additional cameras, thermal, motion sensitive, with cloud backups. If they came again, I wanted every angle. Then I made a call to my cousin Shane, a retired Army intel guy turned security consultant. He owed me a favor from back when I helped him build a barn on his property. When I told him what happened, he was already packing his gear. By the next morning, the story had started to leak quietly at first. Ellie had a contact at the local paper who ran a blog covering municipal corruption. He posted a write-up titled HOA Overreach or Armed Raid and linked to stills from the footage. It caught fire. Within hours, it was picked up by a regional news site. By that afternoon, Channel 8 sent a crew out to the ranch. The reporter, a young guy named Marcus, was careful but clearly intrigued. Standing by the fence line, he asked, "Do you believe the HOA targeted you specifically? They've been trying to push me off this land ever since the annexation mess. I didn't fold, so they escalated. You're saying they used legal paperwork as a smokescreen to commit theft. I'm saying they think their rules override state law, and they're about to learn otherwise." That segment aired at 6 p.m. sharp. Within minutes, Ellie's office phone lit up with calls from other residents who'd had trouble with the board bogus fines, threatening letters, even one couple who claimed their backyard shed was bulldozed over a zoning error. Meanwhile, Deputy Reyes called with an update. "We pulled the security firm's credentials. Their license is expired. Their director's under investigation in another county for impersonating a law officer. That enough for a warrant, already working on it. We're coordinating with the DA. There's a real chance this goes federal. I hung up and looked out over my fields. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the pasture. Somewhere out there, Wendy Dorsey was probably still sipping tea in her manicured backyard, thinking she was untouchable. That illusion wouldn't last much longer. The next morning, the sheriff's department executed a search warrant at the HOA's office. They seized files, digital records, and the storage unit where the firearms had been kept. I didn't go down there, I didn't need to. Ellie went in my place, and when she came back, she was carrying a hard drive and a folder thick with printed emails. "Wendy's been coordinating with the developer," she said, flipping through the pages. "Trying to push legacy landowners out so the company can buy up property for expansion. Your ranch is the keystone, they can't get road access without it." "Now it makes sense," I said. "This was never about safety. They tried to use HOA authority as leverage. Problem is, that opens them up to fraud, conspiracy, and possibly racketeering." That same day, the board held a special emergency meeting. It was supposed to be closed door, but a group of residents showed up with lawn chairs and cameras, demanding transparency. I stayed back, but Shane went to represent me. He recorded the whole thing. Wendy arrived in her usual pastel blazer, flanked by two board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. She tried to explain away the incident as a misunderstanding and claimed the security contractors acted independently. Then someone from the crowd shouted, "So why did you sign the authorization order?" Silence. Shane sent me the clip, and I forwarded it to Ellie. "This is the smoking gun." "Agreed," she said. "We file for punitive damages, and I'll have the civil rights firm in the city join in. If we can prove targeted harassment tied to land acquisition, we're looking at a multi-million-dollar suit." Now the board was panicking. They sent out a newsletter the next day, suddenly suspending all enforcement actions and announcing Wendy's temporary leave of absence. No apology. No admission of wrongdoing, just corporate speak and desperation. But it was too late. Deputy Reyes confirmed that the county prosecutor was preparing charges. Ellie filed the civil suit with 3 other plaintiffs, and I got a call from a state senator's office who wanted to talk about HOA reform legislation. I didn't want revenge. I wanted justice, and now I had it coming from every direction. The best part, they'd taken the bait and tripped over their own arrogance. And now the entire community was watching them fall. 2 days after the sheriff's raid on the Wildridge HOA office, a black SUV with government plates pulled up to my ranch. I was stacking hay in the barn when the door opened, and a woman in a charcoal blazer stepped out, heels crunching on gravel like she owned every inch of it. "Mr. Hart?" she asked, shielding her eyes from the sun. "That's me. Assistant U.S. Attorney Dana Kellerman. I'm heading up a joint task force with the ATF and the State Attorney General's office." That got my attention. She handed me a card and scanned the fields behind me like she was assessing terrain. "I'm here because what your HOA did crosses more than just one legal line. We've identified at least 3 federal statutes they may have violated, including unauthorized seizure of firearms, impersonation of law enforcement, and unlawful coordination with a private entity for coercive land acquisition. Your case is now part of a broader investigation." I leaned against the barn door, arms folded. "So this wasn't a one-off. No, we've been tracking similar incidents across several counties. Yours is the first with clear footage and a direct chain of evidence." "That makes you ground zero for precedent." She didn't smile, she didn't soften. This woman was all business, and from the look in her eyes, she meant to bury someone. "I'll need your full cooperation," she continued. "We've already secured court orders to freeze Wildridge HOA's financial accounts and subpoena their communications with the development firm, Ridgeview Holdings. They finally poked the wrong bear. They tried to create a private police force under the guise of HOA regulation. That's not just unconstitutional, it's criminal conspiracy. And the fact that a developer was funneling funds through the board, that's racketeering." I nodded once. "You'll get everything I've got." She gave me a folder with instructions and left without another word. As the SUV disappeared down the road, I realized just how deep this went. It wasn't about property lines anymore. This was about power, money, and the people who thought they could rewrite the law to suit themselves. By the following week, subpoenas started flying. Ellie met me at the courthouse steps one morning, her boots echoing on the stone like she was marching to trial already. "They found offshore accounts," she said, no greeting. Two of the board members were funneling HOA funds into shell companies tied to Ridgeview Holdings. And guess who opened those accounts? Wendy. Bingo, under an alias. But they traced the signature back to her driver's license application, sloppy and arrogant. Inside, we filed a motion to depose all current and former board members. The judge approved it on the spot. The first deposition was scheduled for 3 days later. It didn't take long for the board to fracture. One of the members, a man named Carl Jenkins, cracked during questioning. He admitted under oath that Wendy had ordered the firearm seizure herself and that they were told to create a paper trail after the fact to make it look legitimate. Ellie leaned in, calm as ever. "Did you participate in that fabrication, Mr. Jenkins?" I just did what she told us. She said we'd be protected, that the sheriff didn't have jurisdiction over private community rules. And you believed her. I didn't know any better. Now you do. The transcript was sealed, but not before Dana Kellerman's team secured a warrant for Wendy's arrest. She was picked up at a country club outside the city, mid-lunch, escorted out in cuffs while still holding a half-eaten salad fork. That image made its way to every news outlet in the state. The next day, Ridgeview Holdings issued a public statement denying any knowledge of the board's actions. But leaked emails told a different story. One memo, dated just 2 weeks before the break-in, outlined a strategic acquisition strategy that included legal pressure on holdout owners. My name was listed on the margin in red ink. Soon, other landowners stepped forward. A retired mechanic named Walter had his well permit mysteriously revoked after refusing to sell. A widow named Marlene discovered her property taxes doubled overnight, all of it traced back to board influence. The community turned. People who once ignored HOA meetings now showed up in droves. A group of residents organized an emergency recall vote to dissolve the entire board. I stayed out of it at first. I wasn't interested in their politics, I just wanted my land left alone. But one night I got a knock on the door. It was a young couple from down the road. She was a nurse, he worked in irrigation. They had a toddler and a mortgage and they looked exhausted. "We're sorry to bother you," the man said, "but we heard what you did. We're trying to get the board disbanded and we need someone the community trusts to oversee the transition. We were hoping you'd help." I looked past them toward the horizon where the fence line met the creek. This land wasn't just my legacy anymore. It had become the front line of something bigger. "I'll think about it," I said. That night, I pulled out the old ledger my grandfather used to keep. It had notes on harvests, rainfall, and neighbors who helped during storms. At the back, he'd written something in faded ink. "Land don't mean much if you're the only one fighting for it." The next morning, I showed up at the town hall, signed the petition to dissolve the current board, and agreed to serve as interim chair during the transition. Ellie called later that afternoon. "You're really doing it. Somebody's got to make sure this doesn't happen again." "Well, you've got help. The state's drafting new legislation to restrict HOA authority during annexation disputes. Your case is the model. How long before Wendy sees trial? Preliminary hearings in 2 weeks. They're tacking on wire fraud charges now. She's looking at real time." The following weekend, we held the first public forum in the community park. Over 100 people came out. I stood under the pavilion, reading from a printed resolution that would end the Wildridge HOA as a governing entity and convert its duties to a voluntary neighborhood council with no enforcement powers. When I finished, a man from the back spoke up. "What about the money they stole? We're pursuing civil damages. Every cent will be accounted for." A woman near the front raised a hand. "And the guns they took from you," I held up a document. "The sheriff's office returned them this morning, every one. Cleaned, cataloged, and locked in my safe." There was a pause. Then one person clapped, then another. Until the whole crowd was standing, I didn't smile. I didn't need to. This wasn't about applause. It was about making sure no one ever tried something like that again, and they wouldn't. Not on my land. The hearing room inside the county courthouse was packed tighter than a cattle trailer in July. Rows of wooden benches overflowed with reporters, ranchers, and residents from the Wildridge development, all waiting to hear how deep the rot went. On the bench sat Judge Clarendon, a man whose reputation for cutting through legal nonsense was as legendary as his silver bolo tie. Wendy Dorsey, now clad in a gray suit that didn't quite hide her discomfort, sat flanked by two defense attorneys. Her usual air of superiority had vanished. Her eyes darted to the rows behind her, but not a single board member had shown up to support her. Carl Jenkins was under protective order after cooperating, and the rest had gone to ground. The prosecutor, a tall woman with auburn hair named Marcy Helton, stepped forward first. She didn't waste time. "Your Honor, we're submitting evidence that the defendant not only ordered the unlawful seizure of personal property without warrant or legal authority, but that she also coordinated with a private developer to forcibly displace landowners through fear, coercion, and outright theft under the pretense of HOA governance." Clarendon didn't flinch. "Do you have supporting documentation? We have email chains, bank transfer records, surveillance footage, and sworn testimony from 3 witnesses." Wendy's attorney stood. "Your Honor, the HOA acted in accordance with its charter, which save it," Clarendon said, cutting him off with a wave. "I've read the filings. What you did wasn't just outside your authority, it was criminal. Continue, counselor." When Helton pulled up a single-page memo on the overhead projector, the room went still. The document was dated 2 months before the break-in and contained a bullet-pointed strategy titled Phase 2, Pressure Points. At the top, key property to neutralize Hart Ranch. Below that, use of security enforcement to initiate bylaw challenge, construct justification post-action. Suppress with legal delay, the courtroom murmured. I looked over at Ellie, seated beside me, and she gave the faintest nod. This was what we'd needed, a direct blueprint of intent. The defense scrambled. They tried to argue that Wendy had acted out of concern for the community, that she had relied on faulty legal advice, that the security firm had misinterpreted her instructions. Clarendon wasn't buying any of it. "Miss Dorsey," he said, leveling his gaze on her, "you arranged for unauthorized agents to enter a home, confiscate state-regulated property, and then attempted to cover it up with fabricated records. You're not just facing civil liability, you're looking at years behind bars." Wendy's eyes dropped to the table. "She's also being investigated by the IRS," Helton added. "Several wire transfers from Ridgeview Holdings were deposited into personal accounts registered under her niece's name. We've confirmed the funds were used to purchase a secondary property in Colorado." That drew a gasp. The judge turned to the bailiff. "Take her into custody, no bail." As she was led out, Wendy didn't say a word, no defiance, no last-minute protest. Just the quiet shuffle of her feet against the polished floor. Outside the courthouse, the crowd had grown, cameras clicked, microphones were shoved forward. I didn't speak. Ellie did. "This case is a warning," she said. "Private organizations, even those posing as community associations, do not get to override constitutional rights. Not with fabricated policy, not with intimidation, and certainly not with illegal break-ins." The reporter from Channel 9 asked, "What's next for the Wildridge development?" "The board's been dissolved," she said. "The HOA no longer exists. And as of this morning, the state attorney general has frozen the assets of Ridgeview Holdings pending a full investigation into fraudulent land acquisition practices." Back at the ranch, the quiet felt different, not like before, when silence meant waiting for the next strike. This was the kind of peace that came after a long storm, the kind you earned. The following week, I got a letter from the state capitol. The new HOA reform bill had passed its first committee with unanimous support. They were naming it the Hart provision, a clause that would require any HOA seeking annexation of existing property to obtain a notarized consent agreement from the landowner, no exceptions. I didn't care much for politics, but that one made me pause. A few days later, I met with the couple who'd first approached me about overseeing the community transition. We sat under the shade of the old cottonwood tree near the fence line. "We're thinking of forming a volunteer advisory group," the man said. "No enforcement power. Just folks helping neighbors. You think that's a good idea?" "That depends," I said. "You planning to tell people what color their sheds have to be?" They both laughed. "No," the nurse said. "We just want to make sure someone's around to organize things like wildfire prep and maybe help elderly folks with storm cleanup." "Then sounds fine by me," I said. I handed them a folder. Ellie had helped prepare a simple charter with language designed to prevent any future group from gaining legal authority over private property. It had been reviewed by the county attorney and signed off by the state. As they walked back toward their truck, I noticed the toddler peering over the tailgate at my horse, eyes wide. I gave a small wave. He grinned and waved back. That night, I sat on the porch watching the stars come out, rifle cleaned and restored, resting in its rightful place behind the door. The cameras were still up, not because I expected trouble, but because folks like Wendy weren't born in boardrooms. They were made in shadows, in unchecked power and silent agreements. But not here, not anymore. This land wasn't just my home. It was a line in the sand. And now, everyone knew not to cross it.